Hey everybody, Erik from Dead Tech here, and today I am coming to you from a place that there is a decent chance you might recognize if you've been following me for long enough. I have digital nomaded my way back down to the Florida Keys where I was maybe a year and a half ago, in this same office, recording videos that might have been like, I don't know, the third reader question roundup here. Anyway, I'm in the Florida Keys. It is hot. It is nice here. I am enjoying myself, so good for me. It has admittedly been a while since I've done a video. I again say that without apology because I'm a busy human being and this is just a hobby for me. But I haven't given up on creating this content. It just, I don't have a lot of time for it. But I have time today, so let's all enjoy that, assuming you enjoy it. If you hate me, I'm not sure why you're watching this video, but let's press on. So today I am only going to do 3 reader questions because as I look at the roster, a lot more of these questions start to get into the world of how do I niche? And I've got some ideas here for how I might approach this. I might start taking some of these reader questions and doing shorter individual videos that just answer one of them. And I might even start to get into some reader questions or like niche evaluations. So what I'd love it if you would do, if you have opinions on this, weigh in the comments. Let me know, would you like to see shorter, one question, more focused videos? Would you like more topics about how to get into a niche, just because that's what so many of you ask about? Or do you like this format, 3 or 4 kind of question roundups? Weigh in down below. I do not have a large enough following to get a ton of engagement, so your comment and your vote will count disproportionately in where I take this from here. So housekeeping aside, if, as always, you are interested in seeing me answer some of these questions about the world of app dev and freelancing, stay tuned. All right, the first question here is a bit of a long one, so I've got the full text here up on the screen. I suppose you can pause it and read all of it if you want. I'm going to jump in here just to save a little bit of time and read through where I think the best context comes out. So the problem I have right now is that it turned out my current position was not as it was advertised from a technical point of view. It's quite below my experience level, and the technical knowledge gains will be extremely limited. In any other situation, I'd just find a new job. But I'm afraid that it will look quite bad on my CV that I've spent 6 and 3 months in my last 2 positions. That's the first kind of question to address there. One potential upside to my current position is that they asked me to be a tech lead for one of the teams. As you've said in your blog posts, that is a great way to get out of the laborer positions that are the software engineer X titles and get into positions where I can practice prescribing solutions rather than implementing them. What I am thinking of doing is making the best of the situation and using this position to focus on improving my non-technical skill as a tech lead and work on my technical skills in my spare time until I've spent a reasonable amount of time at the firm so that moving to another company will not look bad. My question to you is, what would you do in a situation like this? Do you have any pointers or thoughts? Several. So first of all, one thing I'm going to throw out there that's subtle but I think important is I would suggest that you stop thinking so much in terms of skills.
Nunchuck skills, bow hunting skills, computer hacking skills.
And the reason I say this isn't because skills don't matter, they do. It's good to be skilled at things. I think Napoleon Dynamite would agree on the importance of skills, but
girls only want boyfriends who have great skills.
There is a tendency, I think, especially in the app dev world, to view skills as like experience tuples, which is something I've actually blogged about if you want to understand that term. But basically, you know, I have this many years of JavaScript and this many years of XML and blah, blah, blah. And you kind of notch skills almost as if they were badges and you were a Boy Scout or Girl Scout. And I would get away from that idea that like by getting, 2 years of tech lead, you will have a valuable thing to put on LinkedIn or something for independent work. If the goal here is to go independent eventually, it's not so much a question of skills, but more like what can you do and what can you accomplish. So that's subtle but important, and I wanted to mention it. The second thing here is having positions of 6 and 3 months respectively on your resume or CV. I think, now I've been out of this game for a little while, but I think with software engineers, that's not really viewed as particularly uncommon. So I wouldn't really worry too much about that if you're miserable or a job doesn't line up with what you like. Because number one, you might just put both of those jobs on there and not worry about it. Number two, 3 months is so short that if you just leave that as a gap, it's pretty easy to explain to anyone interviewing you that, you decided to take a little time off, or you had, I don't know, 3 months is not a significant employment gap whatsoever, especially a little bit down the line. People wouldn't even notice that. If you look at my LinkedIn profile, I'm pretty sure, let me actually go check so I'm not lying to you, but I'm pretty sure on my own profile, I just dispensed with putting months in at all and just had years. So if you do that and you just have years on there, yes, I did do that. So if you look back at my LinkedIn profile, I'll throw a link in the description if you want to look at my LinkedIn profile, but it just says, I was at this company from 2012 to 2013, this one from 2013 to 2014. Doing that smooths over a lot of stuff, and you could just leave that 3-month thing out. So two things there before getting into the meat of the question. I just wouldn't worry about, I wouldn't focus so much on skills, and I wouldn't worry about that length of job description. All of this speaks to a mildly underlying pathology that happens to employees, especially in software, where we tend to think of collecting things to put on a profile and kind of being graded as this sort of two-dimensional thing on paper. And none of that matters in the indie freelance type business world. People aren't looking at you and grading you, they're just asking, what can you do for me? Now, in terms of the meat of the question, should you be in a leadership role and maybe make the most of that, setting aside the employment concerns, which you can address? If you're just looking to make the most of this role and not looking to make a transition, I would strongly encourage this, because you can go and get experience writing software anywhere. You can do that at home, but it's a little bit harder to get leadership experience.
That they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
Now, forget what you're putting on your resume or whatever. If the goal is to go independent, running projects, developing certain skills around wrangling other human beings to get things done, having responsibility for timelines, these are useful skills when you are the face of your nascent business to a client. So the tech lead, presumably, in a lot of roles, that's just kind of a meaningless title fluff. But if it has actual responsibility, that person probably has more skin in the game as far as management is concerned. So you're owning milestones. You're probably attending different types of meetings where you have accountability. You're learning what that type of responsible interaction looks like. And that's what you're going to be doing as an independent when you're working with clients. You're going to be in situations where you're responsible for delivering milestones, updating them on progress, etc. So circling all the way back, all of that is to say yes. In a software engineering role, for any of those of you watching, if you're looking to go independent, this is a controversial opinion perhaps that I have, but after, 3-4 years of software, look, it's not rocket science. 3-4 years of software, you're probably as good at that as you need to be to make a living doing some kind of automation in a niche that you carve out. So after that, it's really about acquiring other skills that will let you start your own business and run it. And a lot of that is kind of managing expectations, clients, it's other things like invoicing, taxes, etc. But after 3 or 4 years writing software, you can really start to cultivate other skills that will serve an entrepreneur well. So yes, take that role, get all that you can out of it, treat it as a learning experience, and imagine it as like a simulation for having clients of your own later. All right, so this second question is kind of similar. I'm not going to read the whole thing, even though I've got a screenshot of all of it up. It's not that it's not interesting or relevant. There's just a lot of text to read here. So the basic thing here is there seems to be an underlying assumption in many of your posts, meaning my blog posts, that the opportunist has the correct worldview. I'll get into this momentarily. An opportunist, of course, would hold this opinion, but so would the idealist and pragmatist about their own worldviews. And I don't think any of them are absolutely correct, just the way those people chose to approach life with their personality and circumstances. The aware pragmatist or idealist is happy to pat the opportunist on the head and let them take the lion's share of the money and risk in order to get what they need out of the relationship. I think the real problem is when people fail to see the illusion and find themselves in an ill-fitting part of it. So this can be summarized as, I don't agree with you, Erik, that opportunist is the correct worldview. Now, there's a lot of inside baseball here, so I'm going to put some links down below in the description that are going to explain a lot of this. This is what this reader is referring to is opportunist, idealist, and pragmatist as three archetypes that I kind of define in traditional pyramid-shaped corporate structures. I say kind of defined because there was someone named Venkat Rao who wrote an excellent series called the Gervais Principle. Again, link down below. Go read his stuff. He really coined a lot of this. I relabeled some of the terms and appropriated them for things that I was writing about, and eventually my book, Developer Hegemony, links to all this below. By the way, I did this with his understanding and blessing. Like, he tweeted about it. We've exchanged emails, so I didn't go out and just plagiarize this and call it my own thing.
In fact, I believe a certain few of you took almost everything right off the internet.
Damn. I sort of built on what he was doing to apply it in a different context. So anyway, I'm not ripping off other people's ideas. But here is the short form of it. In the corporate world, the three archetypes I'm talking about loosely occupy three levels of the organization, or at least they kind of sort to those levels accordingly. So at the bottom, you have the pragmatist, and the pragmatist is generally the individual contributor, kind of line-level worker, whose philosophy is essentially, I don't live to work, I work to live, I'm going to put in my 40, I'm going to go home, and I have other ways of finding meaning in my life. The idealist is somebody who kind of floats their way up, typically to middle management, and that is somebody who puts in a lot of hours, who really believes in the company's kind of mission and values and in the company as an entity. You can typically recognize idealists by their company man work ethic, and I'm not doing a gender thing there. There's a book from the 50s called The Company Man, but anyway, they identify with the company in terms of their identity. If you want to see this in action, go look at people that put things in like their Twitter bio that like, I'm an ex-Googler or something. That is somebody identifying with the company and making the company this construct part of their own identity. That's typical behavior of an idealist. And then finally, the opportunist is the person that tends to sort to the very highest level of the organization. And the opportunist is someone who, the way I describe it in my book, is they don't really believe in the company at all. And I don't mean that they don't believe that LLCs and S-Corps or whatever exist, but they don't believe in the company as any kind of anthropomorphic type of entity. They will navigate their career as if there were no such thing as the company, and they were just adrift in a sea of individual relationships. So the opportunist, either consciously or subconsciously, as an aside, I encourage you all to do this consciously, doesn't view the company as existing, but they view their boss as essentially a large client. They view their peers and teammates as a form of competitors, since you're all kind of competing in zero-sum fashion for advancement. And they view other people in the organization as sort of allies or potentially competitors or enemies. But you ignore the organization and you focus instead on relationships with people. So that's the kind of TLDR of how you would categorize these people in the organization. Now, one thing that I pointed out, and if memory serves, I emailed this reader back to say is, I view the Taylor organizational structure, the sort of traditional command and control, militaristic organizational structure, as being a poor fit for knowledge work. And I think it creates a lot of harm, I guess like a soft form of harm just because it's so ill-fitting. And it's a pathological kind of structure. And so when I talk about these archetypes, the pragmatist, idealist, and opportunist, the thing that I outlined in the book and that I really believe is in defining them not based on their weaknesses or what's wrong with them, but on what they wind up giving up to fit into the organization. And so the pragmatist gives up hope. The pragmatist basically says, coming into work and doing a decent job and not overworking myself is probably not going to result in my rise in this organization. I'm going to come to work, I'm going to write good software, I'm going to do good design, write good copy, whatever, and I will forever be an individual contributor, and sooner or later my salary is pretty much going to cap out, and that's just life. So there's no real hope of advancement for just kind of coming in, doing a good job, being reliable, and going home. And that's a bummer. The idealist, what they see it as perspective. So the idealist tends to overperform to get advancement. This results in a person who really, really buys into the company as a kind of identity, and then they'll work 60-hour weeks so that years from now, some manager blesses that and says, oh, all right, you've been working 60-hour weeks for the last 3 years. You are now, instead of a widgeteer, you are a widgeteer manager. And what happens over the course of career is that they tend not to get ROI on all that free labor that they give to the company. And they also tend not to get reciprocal loyalty. That company will lay them off, as soon as it makes pragmatic organizational sense to do so. So there's asymmetric loyalty and asymmetric overperformance for the sake of this entity that kind of exists as a minor form of religion to kind of give back to them and promote them. They tend to view the organization as a benevolent steward of their career, which I would argue is a lack of perspective because it is not that. And finally, the opportunist gives up, I will call it ethical certainty. The opportunist gives up relationships. So ethics in the context of the organization, as in we are in this together, we have a kind of common shared set of values and way of interacting. Because to get ahead, you have to cheat. Full stop. You would do things like leave the organization as an individual contributor, go start your own business, declare yourself the CEO, manage not to go out of business for 2 years, and then re-enter the organization at a much higher level with like a VP title. So the pragmatists and idealists would both look at you and say, you're a cheater.
It's not fair, and I think you're really mean. I think you're really mean. I think you're really mean.
That's not fair, you didn't pay your dues, etc. And the opportunist would shrug and say, well, that's what you do to get ahead. So the opportunist who starts viewing the organization as a non-existent sort of displaced entity and focuses instead on relationships and maneuvering to get ahead, that's a pretty lonely existence. You're viewing your teammates as competitors. So you're looking around, and while everybody else is laughing and making friends and having water cooler conversations and beers after work, you may participate in those things, but you know that it's all a stepping stone and you're going to go on to do something else, maybe job hop, maybe move up, and then those former peers maybe become subordinates. That's a lonely way to go through 8 hours plus a day of 40 years of your life. So everybody has something taken from them by this structure. So to get back to the original question, do I view opportunists as the correct worldview, or his assumption that that's my assumption? No. I view it as the correct worldview depending on your goal. So if your goal is to sit in the C-suite of an org, then yes, it's the correct worldview. If your goal is to maximize your earnings, then yes, it's the correct worldview. But are either of those things the correct goal? I don't believe in correct goals. So if you are, let's say, an idealist, seeding perspective isn't the best, but if you get a lot of value and joy out of forging friendships in that organization, out of taking pride in putting that, hey, I work for this company and that's part of my identity, if you enjoy all of that stuff, then God bless. And if you are a pragmatist and you come into work and you put in your 40, and then you find joy in your family or in hobbies or whatever else, also God bless. So I don't actually view there as being a correct worldview. I think all of these are kind of a minor form of modern tragedy, and I am a strong believer in trying to create organizations that don't do this to people. So what I would actually like to see, the correct worldview in my mind, would be one where none of these things exist, and people just form maybe smaller, less dysfunctional organizations to navigate knowledge work in the 21st century. All right, and finally, question 3. I'm going to pop this one up here. In contrast to 2 very meaty questions, this is a pretty simple one, so, yay for contrast. It looks like this one came through Dev too, I think. Dev, if I'm remembering correctly and looking at that user interface correctly. He says, hey, I was reading your blog about specializing, and you mentioned legacy rescue. How does one get into that line of work? Well, there's no one path into doing legacy rescue, so flippantly I would say go work at a sufficiently old company like a bank and you'll probably have no choice but to get involved in legacy rescue. But I'm assuming what we're talking about here is maybe a little more of an intentional approach. I'm guessing the question is, how do you kind of have a specialty either as an independent or maybe you go to work for like a boutique consultancy doing legacy rescue as sort of a focused engagement. I'm going to come in, I'm going to wrangle this legacy code.
He's gonna this. Oh! He pile drove him. Oh! Jeez, I think
port it to something modern or achieve some kind of good outcome. So off the cuff, I could see a few paths to doing this. One would be you could maybe find somebody who's already doing it, either an independent or a boutique kind of agency that specializes in this, and then trying to work for that person or with that person or for that boutique type of agency. So I'm not sure if this exists, but probably, because it's a good market position. So you might draft in somebody's wake, go out and find somebody who is doing this and try to hitch on and help them and learn from them and establish yourself. Another thing that you might do is go work for a generic app dev agency, which there are plenty of those, just somebody who is doing app dev in general, but maybe doing it in such a way that either they have a real like breadth of engagement types. So if you go work for a huge firm that just contracts all sorts of app dev, like Cognizant or Infosys or maybe Accenture, I can't really enumerate all these firms, but like if you find a huge one, you can bet that some portion of what they're doing is going to involve deploying teams to modernize old legacy things. So you could seek out within that large organization the people that are doing that and try to get on that team or try to get those types of assignments. And this would just be a different flavor of the small indie or boutique route, where what you're doing is you're seeking out the people already doing this and trying to hitch on with them and learn. And those are kind of the two ways I can think of to kind of depend on an already trod path. Now, if you're going to do this yourself, I've seen people do this, and it's kind of an iterative process, but it's really going to be a matter of positioning and finding the right kinds of prospects. So you've got working in your favor that, at least in my experience, the overwhelming majority of software engineers get into it for the love of greenfield things. So you're out, going to boot camps, getting immersed in whatever modern front-end frameworks are all the rage these days, or these kind of really appealing technologies. Then you graduate into the corporate world, and you just get plunked into some manufacturing company's old half MS Access code base. And a lot of people don't like that. They'd rather build things from scratch. If you're kind of going in the other direction there, and you like working with legacy stuff, that's nice, because you are already in a relatively rare company, and there is no shortage of legacy code out there. So the thing I would suggest doing, if you're just going to blaze your own trail this way, first things first is I would establish this as your niche. So it may feel difficult to do, but set up a website and talk all about legacy rescue. Talk about legacy code, talk about what qualifies as legacy code, talk about how you categorize legacy code, how you remediate it, all of this type of stuff. Make sure that you are kind of a recognized legacy code guru, specialist, whatever. The next thing that I would do in terms of your positioning is come up with a way to niche down even further, because there's all flavors of legacy code. There's COBOL out there, old mainframe applications. There's just anymore, there's like old Java from the 90s or 2000s. There's pre.NET Windows type code. So there are so many flavors of legacy code that you might want to pick one. And I don't know if you're best off niching in that fashion by the legacy stack, or maybe by the kind of company that you help. So maybe you help banks with legacy code. You're going to have some homework to do there just to see kind of where the need is. And I'm not going to make this particular video about positioning or anything, but you're going to have to sort of zoom in and create kind of a concrete offering. Like, what is it you do and who do you do it for? So maybe it's that you help banks that are running on old green screen applications slice what they're doing off into modern microservices until they backfill it all. You take a concept like that as something you could do or could offer, kind of get it into elevator pitch territory, and then go out and socialize it, see if you get any takers or any interest, and you're scratching an itch that exists out there. So the way to go indie and to do legacy rescue isn't to say, I do any kind of legacy rescue for anyone. It's to go out and find, like, where is legacy code actually a problem? And I keep going back to banks or manufacturing organizations, because these large entities tend to disproportionately still have these sort of like really ancient cores at the heart of their organization beating that are legacy code and mainframes. So that's a great example of kind of a niche you could focus on. Is I know that surprisingly in the 2020s, there are still these companies with these 80s and 90s style mainframes. And I know that's a huge business risk for them. So I know that if I specialize and I produce content about that and I get the word out, that I'll have these conversations. So really when it comes to legacy rescue, it's about getting the experience with it to be credible, having the knowledge to create that content and speak authoritatively, and then to figure out beyond legacy code, what is the actual problem an organization has, and how can you help? Like, what are you trying to do with that legacy code? Are you retiring it, evolving it, moving it to something, doing some kind of automated port the way they used to with pre.NET code to .NET? What are you doing specifically to address that problem? The journey there and all that market research will be really interesting, I would think, for learning and creating a market position. And I think in the end, what you'll find is not so much I specialize in legacy rescue, but I do this very specific thing that qualifies as legacy rescue.
Thank you for watching that reader question roundup. I do appreciate you tuning into these videos. If you would like to ask a reader question, you can do so at deadtech.com/ask. I will also have a link to that down in the description so you can go there right from this page. If you like this video, it'd be great if you could give me a like. It's not just fluff, it actually does help the channel. And if you liked it enough that you want to subscribe, I encourage you to do so. If you're going to do that, maybe click the bell down below, because that will give you an email each time a new video is posted to the channel. And I'll say what I have always said, which is that if you don't like, feel free to give it a thumbs down. I am looking for feedback in whatever form it comes, whether it's comments, likes, dislikes, however you want to engage is of course your business. So with that, I will say thanks again for watching, and I will catch you next time.